Hi folks, I want to talk about something which is kinda like an open secret at the moment with a lot of cases and for good reason. I mentioned genetic genealogy when Rex Heuermann was arrested. I was curious of how much of a role it played, if any, and it's important to note this is not the official confirmed story of how they caught Rex yet, and it may never be. They said his name came up due to searching for a Chevrolet Avalanche. I'm not so sure about that. So they knew about the Avalanche years ago, but say they only got around to searching for it recently? I don't know. I have a hunch that the tip that led them to discovering the car belonging to Rex came from genetic genealogy. A tip for him or his wife. And in the last few days, I think they might have given us a little indication that yes, maybe that may have been the case. They have finally confirmed that they are using genetic genealogy since the task force came in, which everyone kind of expected anyway, but they never said it. And I think that is the real reason why they nabbed him. However, like Bryan Kohberger, use of this technology will not likely be even mentioned in a future trial, so it can easily kind of go under the radar. First off, a bit of context, small bit of history which led us to where we are now, and this is just from my perspective, but from an outsider looking in, the year 2019 was a very important year for all this. There were some major things that happened with regards to true crime and the future of true crime that most people are kind of unaware of with regards to genetic genealogy. And genetic genealogy, in my opinion, has to be the best thing to happen since DNA itself. This is just a complete level up. Huge advancement. It genuinely makes me so excited that we are living through such an incredible moment in time. And it does, I think, go slightly under the radar because detectives and agencies aren't exactly shouting from the rooftops about it, and for good reason. So what is happening? Well, in one sentence, for anyone who is not aware, over the last 2 decades or so, millions of people have been doing DNA tests and uploading their DNA to online databases to find relatives and just to see what they're made up of. A genealogist might have some missing person's DNA profile or a DNA profile from a culprit or a prime suspect from a violent, horrible crime. They will upload the DNA that they have, and if they get any hit at all, even on like a sixth cousin, that's all they need. They will build out the family tree using birth and death certs and marriage certs until they find the person. The most famous example of this is the Golden State Killer. That's how they nabbed him. And it's very important to note, and this may surprise some people, they only need 2% of the population's DNA for complete coverage. So if they get 2% of the population's DNA into a database, they'll be able to identify 100% of the population of that, which is just remarkable. These databases have gotten bigger and bigger, and due to these genetic genealogy databases, we can now identify unknown bodies like never before. Thousands of missing people who were unidentified bodies are being identified and brought home. We are literally heading in a direction where unidentified bodies are going to be completely done away with. Imagine that. In the not too distant future, there will be no such thing as an unidentified body. Genetic genealogy will be able to track all of them down, which is incredible. It's a bit scary because it's such a leap forward and it feels very big brotherish, but it's completely worth it. And that's the most exciting part for me, the missing people. We are going to see if they have the funding and money, of course. Thousands of families get closure, thousands of cases be closed, and the whole notion of an unidentified body will be done away with. The gist of how this is happening is because when you submit your DNA to these genealogy sites, you have the option to be included in a database for law enforcement use. For a long time on the biggest sites, you were automatically opted in, and people are lazy with opt-outs, so loads of data was put into these databases. Then in recent years it switched due to some backlash to the way it is now, where you have to manually opt in. And when this happened, the databases, the police and the FBI, the database decreased dramatically. Well, in theory anyway. That's what we thought was going to happen, but is it really? It does not seem that way, and I'm not sure that option to opt out on sites like Jedmatch even matters in 2023. I don't think it does, and let me explain why I think that. There seems to be a lot of things happening in the grey area, and I'm all for it. To explain, I need to talk about some things that happened in 2019 and why that is important. First off, in February, Family Tree DNA started apologising for sharing users' DNA with the FBI, even if the users said no to law enforcement use. They were like, sorry for not telling you. It started actually in 2018, but it only came to light in 2019. A huge fuss was made about it. Data and privacy were hot topics and still are now, I guess, in 2023. But this cooperation with the FBI more than doubled the amount of genetic data that law enforcement already could access through Jedmatch. They said it was on a case-by-case basis. Only 10 profiles were run through the database. They said law enforcement, the FBI, were not freely browsing genetic data, but they had access to the same information that any user might. Speaking of Jedmatch, on the back of this backlash, and because they were the main ones really in early 2019, they switched for all users, what I was telling you about earlier, having to manually opt in for law enforcement use. And on the surface, at the time, it seemed like this was going to absolutely destroy the database for any law enforcement use, because hardly anyone logged on and did that. There was a tiny percentage of people logged on and switched it. So at a glance, 2019, it seemed like all of this was falling apart due to privacy issues and data protection, and it all kind of got exaggerated and blown out of proportion, in my opinion. Family Tree DNA got backlash, Jedmatch changed how they opted in, and it all looked to be crumbling. But did it really? Because in December 2019, very, very quietly, Jedmatch, the biggest database, was bought by Verogen Inc. At the time when it bought Jedmatch, the company was only set up 2 years previously, with the full intention of assisting law enforcement with crimes. So why would they want Jedmatch if they are not going to use the data? What do you think? Do you think they would buy it if they had no intention of using the data? I don't think so. The company itself has been bought out again since. But here is a screenshot from the website as of this morning, and it's fairly obvious why they bought Jedmatch and what they are doing with that lovely database. Like they're set up to solve crimes, to solve mysteries. That's what they're doing. And since 2019, some of the backlash, how the police and the FBI are using and working with companies like Jedmatch and Family Tree, it's all gotten very clever, very cute. Why is it all hush-hush? Because they don't want backlash. They don't want anyone to stop uploading data. And some of the laws around it are in grey areas and untested for now. It varies from state to state and country to country. And also, usually, you won't even hear about Jedmatch mentioned in any court documents, even when they use it. Other sites, yes, you'll hear about Ancestry.com and some of the generic ones, but they'll refrain from mentioning Jedmatch for good reason. And by the way, I love all of this. I love how they're using it. I love how careful they're being. I love how they treat the genetic genealogy tips. And that's it. That's how the investigation treats it when genetic genealogy gets a hit. The investigation, for investigation purposes, they see that as a tip. The genetic genealogist, if you talk to them, they're like, nah, this is no tip. I've literally solved this for you. Unless there is a baby out there born to the same parents with no birth cert, this is the guy. But for the purpose of the investigation, it's just treated as a tip, which is perfect. They don't go out and ram down a door and arrest a person the second they get a hit. They investigate, they get buckets of evidence, they get so much stuff that the probable cause, most of the times now, isn't even mentioning genetic genealogy. The golden tip they got, it's not even mentioned in PCAs or at trials because they don't need to. Using it as a tip and not rushing is way safer and ensures that the whole case and every search warrant along the way is not relying heavily on that tip and what databases were or were not used, because if there's a problem with it, then the whole case falls down. A fine example of this you can see in the Bryan Kohberger case. He was already on the shortlist, they were well on the road for him, but they got a tip from genetic genealogy from the knife sheet that was generated. They were already on the way to Bryan, but this sped things up. It's not mentioned in search warrants, it's not mentioned in arrest warrants. It has come out in some other court documents. They did talk about it and they said, they're like, yeah, we don't even need to mention this at trial, don't worry about it. And they don't need to, because the story that they will tell the jury of how they caught Bryan is solid. And that whole case is rock solid, by the way. Do not believe some of the stuff that people are saying about it online. Kohberger is a monster and will cook for what he done. Idaho also has some lovely laws around where they don't have to hand over names from databases that were used. So there's no way to track down, say, Bryan's sixth cousin and find out what database or company they used to upload their DNA to. Even if they did, and they found out that the sixth cousin selected no to their data being used in a public database, I'm not sure that has anything to do with Bryan or the FBI. It may just be an issue between the sixth cousin and Jedmatch, for example. I don't know, that's kind of some of the grey areas that are out there, but it's all a no-go anyway in this case because of Idaho laws. I hope it's similar in other states, but looking at how they move the profiles between labs and between the FBI, I do think there is a very good chance they had access to data that the original source of that data may not be aware or may have selected no to the option to have their data used by law enforcement. And I'm all for using this data, no matter what anyone says on any form. In cases where 4 young people are killed like this, do what you have to do, but the FBI have to be very careful. It's not like other countries. I'm also very surprised that some of the Kohberger fangirls knocking about haven't picked up on this and are not trying to make a bigger deal and cry about it online. Then again, I suppose these people are very, very silly humans. So is it that surprising they're missing it? Or is it surprising that it just goes over their head? Probably not. But back to Rex, the whole point of this video. In February 2022, a task force was set up, and 18 months later, a few weeks ago, Rex was arrested. My first thought when he was arrested was, this stinks of genetic genealogy. But there was no mention of that in court documents. Police said in a press conference they identified the car and went from there, but I'm not so sure. They have enough that they don't even need to say it. But if I was to put my life in it, I would guess that genetic genealogy played a bigger part here than they're letting on for now. Why am I saying that? Because they're fully expected to use technology like this. And we now know it was definitely being used in the investigation early on. Maybe they didn't get a hit, but they definitely tried to get a hit on Rex and on his wife. Last Friday, the police investigating the Gilgo Beach murders identified the victim, formerly known as Jane Doe number 7, as Karen Vergata. This poor girl was killed, she was chopped up. Her legs and feet were found in 1996 in Davis Park, and her skull wasn't found till like 15, 16 years later near Toby Beach, near Gilgo Beach. And last Friday, District Attorney Raymond Tierney confirmed her identity. At this time, there is no link. They're not saying if there is any link to the other 4 victims or to Rex. But like them, she was working as an escort at the time of her abduction. They actually identified her months ago, but didn't tell us until now. Rumours on the street are they've also identified Peaches and the baby, but they haven't told us about that yet. How did they identify these missing unidentified bodies? How do you think? Genetic genealogy. This was done in October 2022, so 10 months ago they identified Karen, and her close relatives were informed, but the district attorney, Tierney, asked them to keep quiet about it. They wanted this to be kept confidential. Why did they want to do that? Was it to keep the genetic genealogy aspect of this case out of the news so that the killer isn't tipped off? Like, look at Kohberger again. He's fresh out of a course, a criminology course. He knows how this works. And when he was arrested, he was separating his rubbish and trying to hide his DNA from being picked up. He was also putting trash into the neighbour's rubbish. He knew if he left the sheet there, they're probably, and correctly fared, his DNA was also there. So he knew how important it was to stop the cops from getting his DNA for free without a warrant. If Rex did this, if Rex stopped putting his family's rubbish out on the curb, walking around stuffing his face with pizza and putting pizza boxes with his slobber into the bin, if he stopped doing all that and they didn't get his DNA, he might still be walking around today. Probably would. He wasn't at all trying to hide his DNA like Kohberger was, and he didn't see this coming, thankfully. If they came out 10 months ago and said, yep, we're using genetic genealogy and have identified Jane Doe number 7, Rex may have acted very differently. Another reason I think it was used to generate a tip is they have two sources. They have a double chance to get a hit, Rex and his wife. They definitely tried, 100% they would have attempted genetic genealogy to track them down. But did they get a hit or not is the question. For now, they're not telling us, and they don't need to, and they might never say. Like Bryan Kohberger, the roadmap laid out in the PCA of how they caught Rex is solid, and more importantly, the evidence is solid. Do not, however, be surprised if down the line we find out that there was indeed a tip for Rex or his wife that was generated here on the back of genetic genealogy. Despite what they say, I would not be shocked at all if that's how his name first came up and that's how they looked into the cars that he had. I think it's very, very likely, but I also completely understand why they aren't saying it or they're not drawing attention to it. It's a very, very exciting time when it comes to DNA technology. Like I said, every single unidentified body will be given their name back. More and more cold cases are going to be solved. More and more murderers are going to be found. And eventually some of these grey areas will be flushed out in court. I hope when that happens that common sense wins. Yes, it's kind of scary what they can do now with DNA, but the pros far outweigh the cons. I don't think it should be an open secret, but I understand why it kind of is, and it's going to bring a whole new meaning to the phrase, you can run, but you can't hide, because the future is now. It's happening right now, and I for one am very excited about it. That's my thoughts. Let me know what you think, and if anyone has any information about this stuff that I might not be aware of, please let me know, because I'm mad interested. Or if there's anything which I'm completely way off on, let me know, please. Good luck, God bless, I hope everyone has a nice day.